Is layman an offensive term? Is it offensive to use the term layman nowadays? Does it insinuate that the people to whom you are referring are uneducated? I am wanting to say, this is just one of the ways that CERN's research affects the layman. Is that acceptable?
Layman is a perfectly acceptable term. No one is an expert in every field. It refers to a person who is not an expert in the field. Very educated and accomplished people are laymen in fields not related to their own. For instance, a neurosurgeon may know nothing about economics or paleobotany and may ask, could you please describe that in layman's terms? Say you're at an event and you hear something that you don't understand. This GUID is not sufficient for our needs. We need to concatenate. No one would consider you, or a neurosurgeon, or a physicist incompetent for not knowing what a globally unique identifier is. If, however, you're passing yourself over as a DBA, database administrator, or cybersecurity expert and you don't know what a GUID is, then you're opening yourself up for ridicule.
The word layman is most often used to contrast with expert or professional. It might be offensive to a self-proclaimed expert who lack the expertise, or as Josh indicates, unless you use it referring specifically to professional people, experts. Another way to use it is to distinguish between a member of the clergy, a priest or minister, for example, and an ordinary church member, or layman.
Perhaps not offensive, however, you could avoid the whole issue by writing, "This is just one of the ways that CERN's research affects the public at large." Or, "This is just one of the ways that CERN's research affects the general public."
Only if you're using it in reference to someone who is, or is supposed to be, a member of your field, or the field you are referring to. Unless you're speaking in a religious context, the most common definition for layman is a person who does not belong to a particular profession or who is not expert in some field, Merriam-Webster. If you want to refer to people who are not experts in something, referring to the layman, or as the expression usually goes, in layman's terms, meaning without specific jargon, then this is a word that is perfectly acceptable to use. If, however, you're referring to someone who is or who purports to be an expert, then you might offend them by calling them a layman, as you'd be calling their expertise into question. In fact, the same would go for if you were referring to non-clergy members, and calling a true clergyman's faith into question. So in short, it's non-offensive if you know your audience is not an expert, or a clergyman if you're using that meaning, but can be very offensive if you're referring to a specific person, since it calls their expertise, or faith, into question.
I think it can be used non-offensively or pejoratively, depending on the context. If I say to someone, well, let me explain this to you in layman's terms, then it'll sound pejorative. But when, for example, the Catholic Church refers to someone as a layman, they are referring to the laity, which is a group of people who have a particular role in the church.